Hello and welcome, everyone. This is the first day of our 5-day online exhibition and some presentations from a selection of 28 African and Asian personalities that were featured in London's historic Vanity Fair magazine in the late 19th and early 20th century. Besides Professor Lyn Innes, chairs South Asian Cinema Foundation John Aid, and several SACF volunteers, I'm quite pleased to see and welcome Thomas Brown, the investment manager of the National Lottery Heritage Fund here. Welcome, Tom. We are delighted and we are grateful to the National Lottery Heritage Fund and National Lottery players for providing us this opportunity to visualize and work on this rather unique project, which has a lot of hidden history as well as subtext. Vanity Fair was a prestigious British magazine that hit the stands in London every week between 1868 and 1914. Its founder and editor for about 20 years up to the year 1889 was Thomas Gibson Bowles. One may wonder, why did South Asian Cinema Foundation, which explores themes around South Asian cinema, pick up a project called Selective Inclusion, African and Asian Celebrities in London's Vanity Fair magazine, 1868 to 1914? Well, for a change, the theme excited us for a documentary film and a book, which has become now almost a ritual or tradition for South Asian Cinema Foundation since our last two projects. A documentary film and a book that we are doing under this project has been a worthwhile journey with volunteers from various fields, different countries, and from different age groups. We have also been joined by some academics as well as descendants of these celebrities featured in the historic Vanity Fair. We have been extremely lucky to have found one descendant from the family of Mansur Ali Khan, and she is, of course, Professor Lyn Innes, who is now an inseparable part of our project. So today's session will kick off with Lyn's presentation on her great-grandfather, Mansur Ali Khan. We will also have presentations from our very valuable volunteer, Bina Patel, a science graduate, healthcare IT consultant, and an Odissi dancer. Dr. Kusumpan Joshi, who has been an architect for this project, and of course myself, who is guiding as well as making a documentary on this project. So today, 4 of us will cover 9 celebrities of this unique project. Lyn Innes is Emeritus Professor of Post-Colonial Literatures at the University of Canterbury. She was educated at home on a remote mountain farm in Australia before going to boarding school at University of Sydney. Lyn is, as I said, a great-granddaughter of the Naib Nazim of Bengal, Nawab Mansur Ali Khan, who happens to be the first celebrity in our heritage project. Mansur Ali Khan was featured in the Vanity Fair on 16th April 1870. Welcome, Professor Lyn, for your presentation. I'm very happy to be the technician to operate your PowerPoint.
Well, thank you, Lalit, for that very kind introduction, and I am delighted to be part of this fascinating project on Vanity Fair. I've learned a great deal in the process of being associated with it, and I'm very happy to be able to participate. Well, as Lalit said, Vanity Fair was one of the most important magazines of the mid to late 19th century and was said to be a barometer of English attitudes and fashions. In January 1870, it began to include its weekly cartoon, the first of which was a caricature of Disraeli. And by the time the magazine ceased publication in 1914, it had printed more than 2,000 caricatures of public figures, including British and European royalty, members of parliament, artists, writers, sportsmen, and very occasionally women. These caricatures were accompanied by biographical commentaries. At first, some people were reluctant to be portrayed in the cartoons, but as the popularity and prestige of the magazine and its drawings increased, so too did the willingness of individuals to appear in the pages of Vanity Fair. Now, as Lalit said, among those 2,000 plus cartoons were just 28 featuring celebrities from Asia and Africa. Bertram Fletcher Robinson, editor of Vanity Fair from 1904 to 1907, commented, "A goodly number of Eastern potentates have appeared in Vanity Fair, and their dusky countenances have added a variety of colour to the cartoons. However," he added, "these are rulers who are not royal in a European sense." Robinson's refusal to see Eastern and African potentates as really royal is revealing, and is, on the whole, borne out by the caricatures. The portrayals of British and European royals were generally quite flattering and respectful. On the other hand, treatment of non-British royalty was somewhat less restrained. It could be humorously censorious when it dealt with the activities of people in the Far East, Near East and Africa, and mildly critical of European royals. The April 16th, 1870 issue of Vanity Fair included the first of those Eastern potentates, indeed the first of the non-Europeans to be caricatured, my great-grandfather, the Nawab Nizam of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. If you could show that caricature, please, Lalit. Thank you. As you can see, he is portrayed as a small and unprepossessing man, distinguished by his large turban, oriental slippers and robes, and especially by his somewhat unspectacular spectacles. The caricature by Alfred Thompson is accompanied by the relatively sympathetic caption, "A living monument of English injustice," and a biographical sketch explaining the British government's mistreatment of the Nawab and his ancestors. So who was the Nawab of Bengal? Why was he in England? And why was he given such prominent treatment by Vanity Fair? In the 18th century, the Nawabs of Bengal were affiliated to the Emperor of India, but were also independent rulers over the whole of East India, an area 3 times the size of Great Britain. It was in Bengal that the British East India Company set up its most important trading posts and agreements, alongside the Dutch, the French and the Portuguese, who all wished to trade with India, one of the richest areas in the world at the time. In the mid-18th century, the English hoped to get rid of French competition and began to build military forts in various places, including Calcutta. In 1756, the then Nawab of Bengal, Siraj ud-Dowlah, who was only 20 years old, objected to the establishment of British forts and military bases in Calcutta and sent his army against the British, defeated them and imprisoned a number of soldiers and civilians in what became known as the Black Hole of Calcutta. He also formed an alliance with the French. This was used as an excuse by the British to retaliate. So, led by Robert Clive, they attacked the young Nawab's army at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Clive had first made an agreement with Mir Jafar, the young Nawab's uncle and the commander of his army, that Mir Jafar would keep the army out of the battle. And so Siraj ud-Dowlah was defeated and Mir Jafar was made Nawab in his place. But the new Nawab also became a puppet ruler subject to British control. So if you could show that painting of Mir Jafar and Clive of India, please, Lalit. Thank you. The seat of power was then in Murshidabad, which Robert Clive described as a city as extensive, populous and rich as the city of London, where individuals possessed infinitely greater wealth than anyone in London. Mir Jafar and his descendants were promised an enormous pension worth billions in today's money in return for his collaboration with the British and agreement to allow them sole access to trading and taxation in East India. By the time my great-grandfather, Nawab Mansur Ali Khan, came to the throne in 1838, the pension had declined to less than 1/10 of the promised amount. The British had moved the capital to Calcutta, and Murshidabad had also declined to a small, dusty town with fading buildings. It had been my great-grandfather's ambition to restore the glory of the city, his father's ambition to restore the glory of the city and the status of the family. And so my great-great-grandfather built the Hazarduri Palace, the Palace of 1,000 Doors, which now stands as a federal museum and a popular tourist attraction. Thank you, Lalit. It was here in the Hazarduri Palace that Mansur Ali Khan was installed as Nawab when he was just 8 years old. And it was also his ambition as he grew older to restore the family's rights and the money the British had promised. He was a great sportsman and a lover of art, so that the palace has a wonderful collection of mostly European paintings, particularly landscapes. He also loved music and both Persian and English literature, and he spoke English, Persian, Arabic, and Urdu fluently. In fact, one of his tutors said that if he was standing in another room and was overhearing him, he would not have realized that it was not an Englishman who was speaking. Could we have the next slide, please, showing the Nawab as a young man? Yes. This was painted when Mansur Ali Khan was about 20. It is very similar to a portrait of his father, standing in regal robes and leaning on a document, which might well be a genealogy, showing his descent from a line of nobles leading back to Muhammad. The young Nawab believed that the British in Britain itself would be fair and just, even if those he met in Bengal and who were the administrators did not act fairly and treated him with arrogance. In fact, he was robbed of a great deal of his money and many of the family jewels by one of the British agents who was there in the late 1840s. And his protests and requests for a fair hearing were dismissed by the British officials in India. Nevertheless, he supported the British with troops and elephants during what was then called the Indian Mutiny in 1857. He hoped the British would respond by restoring his rights and status, but the Governor-General in India was more interested in removing power and wealth from the Indian princes and refused to hear his protests. For this reason, the Nawab decided to go to England himself to petition Queen Victoria and the Parliament for restoration of his rights and of the stolen money and the promised pension. He arrived in England in April 1869 and was presented to Parliament first of all that same month. He was also received by Queen Victoria on several occasions and the Prince of Wales and by many aristocrats, and given a great deal of publicity in British newspapers and magazines, all of which tended to emphasize his glorious Oriental clothing, his jewels, and his wealth. Thus, his caricature appears in Vanity Fair after he had already spent a year in London, and his presence and cause had been well advertised. Despite the sympathetic caption and the account of his ill treatment, the Nawab was offended and annoyed by the caricature, which certainly contrasted with the regal portraits of himself and his ancestors back in the palace in Murshidabad. His secretary sought to mollify him by explaining that only the most important people were chosen as subjects for cartoons in Vanity Fair, and that he should consider his presence in the magazine an honor. But the Nawab continued to be disappointed. Just 1 month after his caricature was published in Vanity Fair, the Nawab married a young 17-year-old Englishwoman who was a chambermaid in the Alexandra Hotel, where the Nawab was staying with his 2 sons and his retinue of servants, who included a valet, a musician, a scripture reader, a cook, a secretary, and various others. The chambermaid's name was Sarah Vanel, and she is my great-grandmother. The Nawab had 3 wives living back in India, so under Muslim Sharia law, she became his 4th legal wife. My account of their story will be published next month, and the book's cover shows a photograph of him aged about 40 when he first met Sarah. So I'm pleased to let you know that my book is now available for pre-order from Waterstones and independent bookstores and Amazon, and of course from the publishers, my wonderful publishers, Saki Books. So although Vanity Fair was one of the many magazines and newspapers that supported the Nawab's cause, his appeal to Parliament 1 year later failed. 64 members of Parliament voted in favour of hearing his appeal and endorsing it, and they were mostly Irish MPs. But 120 of the Tories voted against. The Nawab did not give up, however. He was determined to fight for his rights, and he also did not want to return to Bengal, where he would be closely supervised by British agents who often prevented him from travelling anywhere or seeing anybody that he wished to see. So he remained in England for another 9 years, while his oldest son returned to Murshidabad to look after the royal estate. He and Sarah had 6 children, 4 girls and 2 boys, the youngest of whom was my grandfather, Nusrat Ali Mirza. But in 1880, the Nawab was forced to abdicate, and he so became the last Nawab of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. His son and his son's heirs would be known simply as the Nawabs of Murshidabad. One of the reasons given by British officials for the claim that he must be stripped of his title and status, and that he was unable to be a ruler, was his marriage to a woman, as they stated it, of mean extraction, that is, a lower-class English woman. The Nawab returned to India, a sad and defeated man, in 1881, and died in Murshidabad in 1884, aged just 54. That is his story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lyn, for that vivid presentation that created the whole scenario, the ambience, and the stories of that period. I can take 1 or 2 questions because we've got 3 more presentations today. So I'm very happy that many of our volunteers are here, and another descendant of our featured people is here, Narisa Chakrabansi. We welcome you. Anyway, I will give you the chance to ask any questions. We can take 1 or 2 questions. Kusum, you want to take a question? No. So if there are no questions, then we can go to the second of our presentation.
Mira has a hand up.
Oh, right. Mira, please go ahead.
Unmute. She's not.
Mira, you are not.
Unmute.
We can't see you, but can you unmute yourself? We can't hear you, so. Hello, Mira, are you still there? I can't hear her. So rather than waiting, we would skip that and we'll give her a chance to come with a question. Yeah, Kusum, I can't hear you. If you are asking something, please go ahead.
Yeah, Lyn, when was it that you went to Murshidabad?
I first went to Murshidabad myself in 2008 I went with a friend who could speak fluent Hindi and which meant she also understood Urdu. So that was a very, very exciting visit, and the palace was quite extraordinary.
Right. Thank you.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, yes.
Hi.
Sorry.
That was
Narisa is asking a question.
yes.
Yeah, Narisa, please go ahead.
It was very moving, Lyn. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
And I wondered if you had any cousins in India that you've kept in touch with or managed to research them or find them in any way.
Hello. Yes. One of the great pleasures of doing the research into my family was the discovery of many, many cousins. I met cousins in Murshidabad. I also have cousins in Pakistan. I have one of my cousins was in fact the first elected president of Pakistan, Iskander Mirza, and I have met his son. And but more importantly, I think I have met other cousins whom I hadn't been completely aware of and whom I've delighted to get to know. And I know there are also some cousins living in England whom I've been in contact with, but sadly, because of COVID, we haven't managed to meet yet.
Thank you.
Right. So thank you very much to all people who asked questions, Narisa and Kusum, and thank you, Lyn, once again. So now we go to our second presentation of today, which is on Phaya Bhaskar from Thailand, the country which was earlier known as Siam. Phaya was the envoy of the King of Siam, who was featured in the Vanity Fair on 13th of September, 1879. Dr. Kusum Joshi will elaborate on it. Kusum, you're welcome.
Give a brief introduction to Phaya Bhaskar and Narisa will correct my pronunciation if it's wrong. And so,
Kusum, can you raise your voice level?
How can I do that? I don't know. I don't know how to do it.
Uttara, can you help Kusum to raise her voice level?
Shall I go slow? I'll talk louder. Is it better?
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Phaya Bhaskar, the king of Thailand, and that was King Chuli Khan, who reigned from 1853 to 1910. He came here because of the modern attitude and the progressive attitude of the King of Siam at that time. And I think King Chuli Khan realized that this was a period when
I think somebody's microphone is on. If it is Rupa, can you please check if your microphone, if you are not, please mute yourself. Can you please mute yourself? Kusum, can you please hold on?
Okay. I don't think it's Rupa.
No, somebody is there who is, someone in the audience is not muted. Whoever it is, I would request everyone to check if everyone is in mute form. Otherwise, we can't
Professor
proceed.
Sri Pandi. Professor Sri Pandi, you
Yeah,
are not muted.
thank you, Gabriela. Thank you very much. Please take care, and in favor of the show, please check that you are muted. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gabriela. Kusum, you go ahead.
Siam, because of the forward-looking attitude of the ruler of Siam at that time.
Could you repeat your, because I think some of your sentence was not audible. Can you start again? And please, can you put your frame in the middle? You are, yeah, just a little lower. That's right. That's right. Sorry. Yeah, you can go ahead now.
King of Siam, King Chulalongkorn Khan, was a very forward-looking ruler. He realized that to survive and to remain an independent kingdom, he had to connect with Western powers and open up the country to modern Western influences. And he did so by introducing railways and a modern judicial revenue and new system of administration in his country. He also tried to end a number of old, outmoded kind of social customs, such as slavery and the practice of people prostrating themselves before the ruler. And he therefore also tried to build up ties, diplomatic relations with Western countries such as USA and UK. And he's also said to have set up schools, including schools for girls. And during his time, a number of Siamese princes from the royal family were studying in the West. And for instance, here's a row of princes studying here in the West in the 19th, early 20th centuries. And right at the head is the king himself. So he was also the first, I'm told, the first king of Siam to have visited the West, and he also welcomed foreign visitors. And this idea of sending an envoy to the court here to the UK was his and was part of his westernizing policy. As you will see, just perhaps to note in this caricature is the mix of Eastern and Western dress. I tried to find out what like it looks like a dhoti, the lower garment looks like an Indian dhoti, but I wasn't sure whether that was what it was known in Siam.
Kusum, sorry to interrupt, Kusum. Your PowerPoint is not visible. Have you switched it? Have you removed it, or because we can't see?
It's visible to me.
But why is it not visible to me? Can I check with others? Can you see a PowerPoint when Kusum is presenting? Anybody can?
Yes, I can.
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh,
Yes,
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, we can. We can.
My
Okay.
apologies, Kusum.
So that's all right. So yeah, it was, I'm told that it's called a Panung or Palai. And again, Narissa can correct us if it's not right. And he belonged to a very powerful family, and some of his relatives had been advisors to the royal family. It is said that he himself was educated in London and also went for some education in France. And after his exposure to the West, Phaya Bhaskara Vamsi is said to have returned to his country and to have served the king Chulalongkorn Khan. And he was an army officer. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Siamese army. And he also became an expert in foreign affairs. And in 1879, the king chose him to represent him as his envoy to negotiate some important terms with the British government. He appeared in the Vanity Fair the same year that he came to this country, and there was a small write-up about him which described his background and some of his qualities. It was with some difficulty that we managed to find out about Phaya Bhaskara Vamsi, and in this we have been helped by Narisa because of her connections with the royal family of Siam. And one of the few things that we found out during the project about the activities of Phaya Bhaskara Vamsi, apart from his meeting with the government and negotiating terms of good relations between the two countries, the UK and Thailand or Siam, was that he was invited and taken on a tour of Oxford. And there he was taken on a trip to the Bodleian Library, and he examined some ancient Sanskrit manuscripts because he was himself a great scholar and interested in academics. He also is said to have visited the Clarendon Press, and he was taken on a tour of various colleges in Oxford. And before he left Oxford, he also went to visit the Blenheim Palace. After Phaya Bhaskara Vamsi, the next or the only other person from Siam or Thailand who was featured in Vanity Fair was King Chulalongkorn's other son, one of his sons, Prince Vajiravad, who became the king in 1910 after his father's death. Another of the king's sons was actually to become the king, but he passed away, unfortunately, before he could accede to the throne. And so Prince Vajiravad, who had come to study here in the UK and who lived here for a number of years, he was made the king in 1910. We have this image of his acceding to the throne of the Sphere, in the Sphere magazine. But it is Narissa who's going to talk about Prince Vajiravad on the 27th. So we'll just I just end my introduction to Phaya Bhaskara Vamsi here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kusum. Can you stop the share now?
Yeah, just one moment.
Yeah.
Okay, stop share. Okay.
Right. Thank you very much for that very, very elaborate scenario you gave. I would welcome our volunteers, our guests, to throw a question or two. Anybody is welcome. Yeah, there is a question from the descendant, Narisa. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, I just think it's interesting to tell everyone that Siam was unique in Southeast Asia in not being a colony. And so the British, despite the unequal treaties, the British had to treat Siam as an independent country. So that's quite interesting, I think. So it wasn't a sort of colonial lord coming to see the master, but it was not on equal terms, but on semi-equal terms.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that it was...
Kusum, your volume is again low.
Do you think that it was part of the king's very forward-looking attitude and his behavior that might have influenced the British deciding against over interference and converting it into a kind of a colony that might have helped?
Yes, I think so. And I think that with the British in Burma, I think they were probably overextended as well. And so I think they decided not to go any further. But there were various times in the 30 years from 1880 to 1910 when Siam could have become a British colony or indeed a French colony.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to compare the two cartoons. And it seems to me, I don't know whether Narisa or Lyn would agree, but it seems that the the second one is much more favorable, if you like, than the first one.
Yes, I think that's very true. It's just quite a straight representation of him, really, without trying to make him a figure of fun in any way.
Yeah.
Can I just add that I came across a book written by a Western visitor to Thailand, to Siam during the rule of King Chulalongkorn Khan. And he has written in his book that he visited the one of the royal palaces, and there he found a number of Vanity Fair portraits and drawings, which used to be very much on sale and bought even though during the time that they were being produced. And when he went to the royal palace in Thailand, he saw Phaya Bhaskaravangsi's picture there, and also several other Vanity Fair portraits. So I thought that was very interesting.
And also, do we know, Lyn was talking about how her descendant was offended by the cartoon. So I just wondered what the reception was by the Siamese.
I couldn't come across anything. I don't know if anybody, if Narisa or somebody else has come across anything.
No, we don't really know, but the fact that the king hung these cartoons in his summer palace suggests to me that he liked.
Yeah.
And when you see my presentation, and you know the way in which Crown Prince Wachirawut is represented, I think you see the same. It's in fact, a very sympathetic representation.
Yeah, thanks, Marissa.
Right, okay. So any other questions, or we go to the next?
Just one comment.
Yes, Alka, please go ahead.
I think I saw on YouTube, there is a channel called as Useful Charts, where the person, he just puts all the charts of like family members, and he did put for the Thai kings, and he did mention you as well in that. So just a comment.
Okay.
Right. So
and just one comment. You know, the text also, I think, is not ridiculing Phaya Bhaskaravangsi, at least. And Lyn, don't you think that it's odd that while the caricature is the sketch of the Nawab is quite he made a kind of an object of ridicule, but the text is quite sympathetic to him. That was a bit of a contrast, wasn't it?
I agree. And of course the cartoon was done by one person and the text by another. But it occurs to me that one of the differences between the cartoon of the Nawab and of the King of Siam might have to do with the fact that Siam was an independent country and not occupied or colonized by the British. And I think, you know, the British did want to see the princes of India as subjects and not as equals.
right. So I think now is the time to move on. I would very much like to thank all of you, Narisa, Lyn, and of course, John and Kusum for this after discussion, which was very, very tempting to come in. As the third in our list is Bina Patel. Unfortunately, she's tied up in a meeting, but she is, as soon as she gets free, she will do her presentation. And there is another presentation by Kusum, but I will come up with my presentation now. So I will share screen. If you give me a second. Right. As you can see, I am going to speak a little bit about Sir Salar Jung, and this is Salar Jung was the second Indian celebrity who was featured in Vanity Fair on 14th of October, 1876. He was a Muslim nobleman and Prime Minister of Hyderabad state in the Deccan. His full name with his title was Nawab Mir Turab Ali Khan Sar Salar Jung Sirajud-Dawla Mukhtar ul Mulk. We can see his caricature isn't a real caricature, but it is free from any obvious distortions or exaggeration. In his portrait of the Prime Minister of Hyderabad, Leslie Ward Spy, Vanity Fair's most prolific cartoonist, caricaturist, has shown Salar Jung to be seated in a comfortable and relaxed manner and looking ahead of him in a cheery way. The chair he occupies is a stylish dark green. And it is also evident from Leslie Ward's account of his in his autobiography that he had sketched Salar Jung after arranging to meet him face to face. The Vanity Fair biographical information on Salar Jung is brief and is very complimentary from start to finish. He is described as an Indian statesman of boldness and intelligence who has wisely made friends with British preponderance in his country. His royal services to the British during the revolt of 1857-58 are clearly mentioned. Finally, he is praised for being a truly good man. The positive qualities he is acknowledged to possess include those of being liberal, progressive, enlightened, and urbane. Coming on his hospitality, Ward said in his autobiography, Sir Salar Jung had brought his curry cook with him who provided innumerable curries, of which very few were familiar to me, although I enjoyed them considerably more than I was much interested in distinguished company who were present there. Hyderabad that Salar Jung represented was among the richest and most powerful of over 500 princely states scattered all over India. His ancestors had migrated to India from the Middle East. Sir Salar Jung was born on 2nd January 1829 after receiving traditional education in Arabic and Persian. He also learned English while still in his teens. His capacity to converse fluently in English was commended by British. While still in his early 20s, he was elevated to the position of the Prime Minister of Hyderabad and served under various nizams. Now, in this picture, Salar Jung sitting third from the left is in a black gown, is with the young Nizam Mahbub Ali Khan, 6th, seated in the middle. The British regent standing and other nobles. His efforts to prevent the anti-British rebellion of 1857 from spreading in Hyderabad won him the eternal gratitude and friendship of the British. His strenuous efforts to introduce law and order and much needed improvements and reforms in the administration of Hyderabad further raised his stature. British recognized his services by making him KCSI in 1866 and GCSI in 1870. So you can see what is the full form of these 2 honors. In the summer of 1876, Salar Jung responded to an invitation from Prince of Wales and sailed to Britain. He arrived in London a bit later than planned. This is because he was forced to prolong his stay in Paris due to accident. He fell on a staircase inside Paris Grand Hotel. He received a warm welcome from British dignitaries after reaching UK. Many of them were known to him personally as they had been his guests in Hyderabad. He and members of his group were also presented to Queen Victoria at Windsor Castle. You can see this is a postcard of the Star and Garter Hotel over the Thames, 1890, where Salar Jung held a grand dinner. Vanity Fair caricaturist was also an invitee, as I said earlier. So during his mission in England, the British also showered him with honors. In mid-June 1876, he was awarded the degree of DCL, Doctor of Civil Law, by University of Oxford. A month later, he received the honorary freedom of the City of London at Guildhall for his conduct in the revolt of 1857, and a lunch was organized for him there by the Lord Mayor. We can see his siding with the British in the revolt or mutiny or War of Independence, as Indian historians call it, was very, very vital in raising his profile with the British. The Spectator of July 1876 talks of Salar Jung's impressive address to the audience at Guildhall. Same year, English playwright Joseph Turnley dedicated his English play, The King or the First Plantagenet, to Sir Salar Jung. Salar Jung was keen to utilize his visit to influence the British authorities in London to agree to the return of the Nizam of Hyderabad of the area of Berar that had been taken away from his control by the British. Unfortunately, this was not, he could succeed in getting this back. Now, my last two slides sorry about that. Salar Jung had an eye for, this is the Dunrobin Castle in Scotland, where Salar Jung was a special guest before he returned to India. He stayed here and met high dignitaries. Now, my last two slides. Of course, Salar Jung had an eye for beautiful and costly pieces of art form from various parts of the world. Taking advantage of his trip to the West, he purchased a number of artifacts and also managed to ship them to Hyderabad. These are now part of Hyderabad's world-famous Salar Jung Museum. So that brings my presentation to a close. I think we have another presentation from Kusum and Bina, but if you want to ask me something, I will try to answer it. If I can't answer it, I'll pass the question. Kusum, most welcome, anyone wanting to ask, or we can go ahead.
I can see Bina, she's back or she's not?
Yeah, can you raise your, Kusum, there's a problem with your audio. Can you raise your, let me check.
Bina there, is Bina back for her presentation or not?
Yeah, let me see. I think I can't, she's online, but
I'm here.
I'll just give her a check.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Oh,
Yeah.
Great. So, Bina, if are you ready or you want to take some time?
I don't know.
You want to have some,
I would like, if I had a little bit of time, I can debrief from my previous meeting, which was totally not related to history or anything. So I might get my head in gear. But okay, if you want me to do it, I'm quite happy to do it.
So Bina, most welcome. I think we would let you relax a little bit, have some cold water, some juice, and enjoy Kusum's presentation.
brilliant.
Kusum, are you ready for yours?
I will.
Okay, okay.
I'll
So
share screen.
now I would, if I can request you
The other one from.
to introduce your
I've got one more.
subject. I'm not sure of which one are you presenting. So please introduce your presentation. So we have a lineup of so many presentations over the next 4 days, and one of them is from Narisa, who is here with us, and Alka and John. So many of us will be presenting. So whenever you are ready.
Well, while we're waiting, it is interesting to note the almost royal in the text, which is a theme, I think, this whole business about presenting people as royal. Anyway.
Yes, yes, quite true. So I can see Kusum's PowerPoint now on the screen. So you can start whenever you want to. So this is our second last presentation. After this, we will have the grand finale by Bina Patel, who is a very valuable volunteer and a friend.
Can you see the next slide?
So Kusum, once you bring it to the full screen, you can take a few seconds to introduce your.
Sorry, just having some technical issues. So,
Okay, we can wait.
just bear with me. I think I'll stop the share.
We can see the PowerPoint and.
Yeah, no, it's just not.
No worries. Yeah, we can see your PowerPoint full screen.
Okay, thank you.
Kusum, you can introduce your subject and
Hello.
go ahead, right? Thank you.
Uttara, why is it not moving?
It will move. Either you play with your mouse or just any key if you press, I think it should.
Sorry, apologies. This didn't happen with the previous PowerPoint. No, this shouldn't be happening.
If you hover your mouse right in the bottom left-hand corner, you might see a small grayed out arrows coming up on your screen. You can click one of those. I don't know whether they'll come up on your
Okay, I'll try that. Last time it happened.
Yeah, apologies for the technical difficulties. This didn't happen with the first PowerPoint, but let's see if we can just bear with us. I think this mouse. Are you sure it's on?
You can exit PowerPoint, then again bring it in.
Yeah, okay, I think we'll try that.
And then we'll give another go, and if there's any problem, then we can maybe ask Bina to go ahead with her. Is it a battery which is the issue of your mouse? So, John, may I ask you which is your presentation, which is you're doing?
I'm doing Ranjit Singhji.
Oh, Ranjit Singhji, right. And that is on not tomorrow.
Sunday.
Oh, that's Sunday. Right, we can see the PowerPoint again. Just try to change one slide if it. Can you hear me, Kusum? Yeah. Yeah, it's working. You change one slide.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. So yeah.
So should I just use this one? Yeah, the right for moving forward and the left for moving back. Hold on.
And use only one
okay.
key or one option to change the slides.
Let me open this.
Perhaps when you're explaining, you have to keep
I
it.
don't know what the issue is. Anyway, just bear with me one moment. Apologies, it's just my eyesight is a bit of an issue, so apologies for my head being quite close to the screen. Just where's the arrow? Can you see where the arrow is? Yeah. Anyway, I found it. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Yeah. 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 It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're unmuted. Yeah.
So today I'm trying to focus on the three Chinese in London in Vanity Fair. Ku Sung Tao, who was here in 1877, Hoong Chang, who came a bit later, and Chang Ta Jen, who also came later. So these were all kind of diplomats from China, and they were featured in Vanity Fair while they were here. It's not always that it's only people who visit the UK who are featured in Vanity Fair. Most of them were in London and therefore they were featured, but very often they were in the news and therefore they were featured. So now we will be focusing today primarily on Ku Sung Tao, who was the first Chinese ambassador to the court of St. James from the Empire of China. At that time, China had a totally different image and attitude towards the world and towards their own self. China had been for centuries a kind of a very isolated part of the world, and they had also only some relations with some of the countries near abouts, and they had lost touch with the outside world. They were not familiar with the geography of the world. In fact, I read somewhere recently that even in the 1800s, the beginning of the 1800s, they did not even, most Chinese did not even know the difference between Sweden and Switzerland. They thought it was the same. And they had all kinds of notions about Western powers, that in Western countries, the people, they boil the children and they eat them up, and all kinds of weird ideas. And the Chinese, because they were a very powerful and very advanced civilization and had been so for several centuries, they had a notion about themselves that they were like the top of the world and that they did not need to have any relationship with anybody. And so the idea of having a diplomat sent to the UK or accepting a diplomat in China or to have any diplomatic relations with any country or kingdom or empire was something which was quite alien to their understanding. This was in the 1800s, in the mid 1800s. So it was a very new idea when the first Chinese diplomat came in 1877 to the UK, and he was Kuo Sung Tao. That is the image, the caricature of Kuo Sung Tao, which appeared on 16 June 1877. He is sitting there smiling, looking quite relaxed. And that is a portrait of his, a contemporary portrait of his. There is a lot of similarity. I don't think there is any much fun making or poking fun in this Vanity Fair image. It's quite true to life and has shown him looking quite relaxed and respectable. His write-up was about 1.25 long as a column. And in that also, they wrote very positively about him, saying that he was from this ancient, very highly advanced civilization. And in fact, they were, it is even critical of the British that they were sort of bullying the Chinese, because that's what happened in the 1800s when the Opium War were fought, and Britain, along with some other European powers in the 1800s, forced the Chinese emperor to open up various ports and to open up trade relations with Western nations. So the Vanity Fair is being quite fair to Kuo Sung Tao, both in the write-up as well as in his drawing, and in fact being quite critical of the British too. Now, who was Kuo Sung Tao? He was a very educated person. He was a scholar, a statesman, and he had been a viceroy, a kind of a governor in one of the Chinese provinces. And he became the first Chinese ambassador to the court of St. James between 1877 and 1879. So he was here for about 2 years as the first Chinese ambassador to the UK. And as I just mentioned, the need to have an embassy and an ambassador in the UK arose because the power relationship between China and the West started changing. Now, what was noticeable in the 1800s was that China had the trade relationship between China and Britain was unfavorable to Britain. People in Britain were addicted to tea, and so Chinese tea used to be imported in vast quantities into this country. And the Chinese, on the other hand, were not interested in anything from Britain. So the government here had to pay in gold and silver to pay them back for the tea that they used to import in large quantities from China. So to offset this unfavorable balance of trade, the British started thinking, and they came to the conclusion that after they had started their empire in India, and they had started growing various crops and cash crops which could be imported at huge profit to other countries, they felt that opium was something which could be sold to the Chinese. Now, the Chinese had an old habit of using opium, but they were not that much of addicts to opium as they became later on due to the British policy of flooding China with opium. So because the British wanted to encourage the uptake of opium in China, they wanted to make the people in China kind of get addicted to opium. And this was resisted by the Emperor of China because he started finding that after the Opium War had led to the opening of some of the Chinese ports to British and foreign trade, there were huge chests of opium that were being dumped into China. So and there were some very corrupt people in China who used to buy these by breaking the law. And so many people in China were becoming addicted to opium. And there was a huge resistance on the part of the government. And the Chinese emperor at one time in the 1800s threw a large number of opium chests into the sea. And so that led to a kind of a war between the Chinese and the British, and two wars were fought, and that led to greater opening up of China, China being forced to open up ports, to have more trade, and to have even people Christian propagandists coming into the country and preaching about Christianity, which was seen as a threat to the Chinese and their own Confucian thoughts and their beliefs. So there were strained relations between the Chinese and the British in the 1800s, ever since the two Opium Wars, 1839, 1842, 1856 to 1860. And in 1875, the situation worsened because a British official by the name of Margery was assassinated by a Chinaman. And this annoyed the British, and they held a convention and forced the Chinese to sign a treaty called the Yantai Treaty of 1876. It was again an unequal treaty in the sense that the British forced the Chinese to accept terms which were quite unfavorable to the Chinese. And part of the treaty of 1876 was that the Chinese would have to send somebody to Britain to ask for forgiveness for this murder. And it was as a result of this Margery affair of 1875 and the Treaty of Yantai of 1876 that finally Kuo Sung Tao, who was an official in the Chinese government, was selected to come and to ask for forgiveness from Queen Victoria. So who chose Kuo Sung Tao was Hoong Chang, who's another of the characters who was featured in Vanity Fair. He was the second Chinese who came here and who was featured in the Vanity Fair. Hoong Chang was a very important official. He was also a highly educated person, very intelligent, very important official. He was given the title of Viceroy, and he was a provincial governor in China. And he chose Kuo Sung Tao because the two got on very well, because they had similar ideas about how Chinese foreign policy and diplomacy should change. There were many Chinese nationalists who resisted change, who did not want to have any diplomatic relations with foreign Western powers, did not want anybody to go away from China, nor wanted to accept any foreign diplomats in China. But people like Hoong Chang and Kuo Sung Tao felt that to survive, China would have to open up, would have to modernize, would have to give up this idea that they were supreme and they did not need to have any relations with anybody, no diplomacy, no diplomatic embassies. And so Hoong Chang, who was quite important at that time, chose Kuo Sung Tao. And at first, Kuo Sung Tao, it seems, was reluctant because it was a very difficult piece of work which had to be accomplished. And he knew that once he would come back, his whole career would be destroyed, because there would be lots of people in China who would be very angry with him for having gone to the UK and sort of brought the prestige and the importance of China down. It would be so insulting and humiliating. But in spite of that, finally, he did agree and he came to Britain. He started out in December 1876 and he reached in January 1877 with about 30 members as part of his diplomatic group. He was also accompanied by his wife. And they reached Southampton in January 1877, as I said. And they were given a huge public reception because there was a lot of curiosity in Britain about who were these people from China who were coming to their country. The Punch, one of the magazines here, featured the Chinese ambassador on the 10th of February 1877. He was, Kuo Sung Tao was shown like a little monkey peering at the British lion, and there was a poem written about him also. So he was ridiculed, although he was given a lot of respect in the UK, but the Punch, of course, made fun of the Chinese. And his wife also was also very much in the news. A poem was written about her, and she was referred to as a tottering lily, perhaps because the Chinese, the people knew in the West that the Chinese ladies used to bind their feet to keep them small, and so they sometimes used to be not able to walk properly, and they used to keep tottering as though they are just about to fall down. So I think just to make fun of that, or to refer to that, they referred to Madame Kuo Sung Tao as the tottering lily. And both Kuo Sung Tao and his wife often attended a number of public events to which they were invited by the government at the time. After reaching Southampton, they were taken by the British authorities to London, and their headquarters were made in 49 Portland Street, which is in London, and which is even today the headquarters of the Chinese embassy. I think they have another building, but this is also part of their of the Chinese embassy in this country. I recently read that there was a funny incident while Kuo Sung Tao was here. I think one of the members of his group of people was walking through Oxford Circus one day, and somebody went, a little boy, some English boy came and pulled his pigtail from the back. So he got very angry and he hit him with his umbrella on his head. And so the English boy fell down and he fell under a cart and he hurt his leg. So the next day, or in a day or two, the Chinese ambassador got a notice that one of his officers, one of the members of his group had caused this injury to this English lad, and they would have to pay compensation. So that made Kuo Sung Tao very angry with his employee, and he got so annoyed that he said he was going to kill him. He was just going to chop his head off, and he really meant it. But then the English officers, some of whom had come along with him to China, from China to England as part of the group, told him that please don't do that. Please don't kill your officer. It will cause a real stir. So he calmed him down, and so Kuo Sung Tao gave up this idea. Otherwise, he was going to kill him and just carry that threat out in one of the rooms in 49 Portland Street. So there would have been a murder, and there would have been a huge tamasha. So luckily that was avoided. Now, while Kuo Sung Tao was here, apart from his diplomatic work that he carried on, first of all, he came and he met the Queen, and he was received by Queen Victoria, and he tendered his apology. And first he gave up, he showed his credentials and was accepted as the diplomat, as the ambassador. And then he also went to various places to get familiar with this country. He went to Chatham, where he visited a place where a portrait of Chinese Gordon, who had been one of the British officers with whom the Chinese had worked in the 1800s, was put up, and he went there, and you can see it here in this slide. He also visited Hanbury Botanical Gardens in Italy. It was a very outstanding botanical garden that had been set up by an Englishman who had invested a lot of money in setting up this exotic garden, which was full of fantastic plants. And knowing about it, Kuo Sung Tao visited this Hanbury Botanical Garden, and he had a Chinese word written on one of the buildings, the entrance to one of the buildings, which means happiness. So you can see it on the neighboring slide. And he also visited Ipswich, where he saw some engineering works, and he visited a biscuit factory. He also went to some roots show to see some plants, I suppose. And then he was also appointed as the diplomat as the Chinese diplomat to France. And while he was here, China started being represented in 3 European countries, in UK, in France, and in Russia. So after carrying this work out, he was probably thinking that he might stay on a bit longer, but he was asked to return home. Well, these are some of the pictures of Hanbury Garden, which I should have shown you earlier. It's this Hanbury Botanical Garden was set up in 1870s, and it seems now it has been sold to the Italian government by the British, and so it is managed by the University of Genoa, if I'm not wrong. So basically, that was it. And in 1879, he was summoned back, and he went back to China. He was quite elderly. I mean, he was not a very young person when he came to this country. He was about 60. So he stayed here for 2 years, and then he went back. And when he went back to China, he found that there was a lot of opposition to him because many people didn't like him. They felt he was anti-national. Actually, he was not an anti-national. He was very much pro-China, but he wanted China to modernize, and that wasn't liked by some people. And so after his return, he had to stay a kind of a very retired life, and he lived and he taught somewhere, and he just died a few years later. And that was in 1891 that he passed away. So that ended the life of a very important person who was the first Chinese diplomat to the UK and who tried to change the course of Chinese history by opening up China to the world. I hope that has been a bit of a useful thing. We'll try and focus on Hoong Chang. Hoong Chang was another diplomat who came here, and Chang Tajen. They too were also quite important, but they carried on similar work of connecting with the West and building bridges. But I wouldn't like to focus on it because it wouldn't be fair to do all in a rush. So we can keep them for our next one because we want to do another series soon. Thank you. Okay, how do I stop share?
You're on mute, Lalit.
You're muted.
It's all right.
Oh, sorry, I kept on speaking. I'm so sorry. I just said that thank you very much, Kusum, for that very vivid, very interesting, full of humor presentation. I liked it, and I am sure others also liked it. And before we go to Bina for a finale, I would welcome 2 questions, minimum 2 questions. If anybody has any interesting take, interesting, inquiry, anybody can go ahead, or if nobody is keen, then we can go to Bina. Right. So I think everybody wants to listen to Bina now. That's the signal. So yeah, of course, we are going to now go to the final with Bina. Bina is a very, very valuable friend and a volunteer since the very beginning of this project. As I said, she is a science graduate, healthcare IT consultant, scientist, and also an Odissi dancer, bookworm, and a baker. So, and she has picked up, rather a complex presentation like Kusum. She is going to deal with 3 Sassoon brothers who were also featured in different times in Vanity Fair. So I would like her to come up and give introduction, and I'll be in the gallery. Thank you very much, Bina.
Okay, so firstly, can you see my screen? Or am
Yes, we can.
I am sharing, okay. So please forgive me because I've not really done this type of presentation before. They are 3 very interesting characters of a larger family. And I'm hoping that what I have to tell you, I was really interested about reading about them, and hopefully I can generate some interest as well for listening. It's not full of dates, I have to say. So I shall begin. Just get my presentation made up. Okay. So the 3 Individuals that I'm going to be talking about in context are Albert Abdullah Sassoon, Reuben David Sassoon, and Albert Edward Sassoon. I might just refer to them as Abdullah and then Reuben and Edward, otherwise the two Alberts get a bit confusing. So they were featured in Vanity Fair's Men of the Day, apart from Albert Edward, who was down as a statesman of the day, as he was a politician. So just to give an overview of where they sat in terms of the Sassoons, which you would hear the name probably a lot. They were also referred to as the Rothschilds of the East. It's a very wealthy family. But the family of David Sassoon goes back, they can actually trace their heritage way before David Sassoon himself, but that would be a whole week-long affair if we were going to cover the whole family history. But David Sassoon was basically the father of Albert Abdullah, Albert Edward, who is a grandfather of Albert Edward, and the father of Reuben David. So Reuben and Albert Abdullah were half brothers, because from the first marriage of Hannah Joseph to David Sassoon, he was one of the sons, and they also had another son and another two daughters. And with Farhan, who he married, who happened to be a niece of Hannah as well, they had sort of 8 other children and Reuben and 3 daughters. They've all got quite a lot written about them as individuals. Obviously, like the 3-daughter things get lost, and it's such a shame that a lot of the women's side of the history disappears over time, or is not written about in the same way. Maybe more it's written about now, but in those days they were home characters. So it was nice to see Kusum's presentation, of some representation at least. So Albert and Reuben, half brothers, but they were like brothers, and Albert Edward, who was the son of Abdullah. So to start with, I'm just going to actually show you, I'll carry on here. So David Sassoon himself started this story for why Albert Abdullah and Reuben ended up in India and then to the UK. So essentially, at the time that they were represented in Vanity Fair, they were all based in England. But David Sassoon was born in Baghdad, and they came from a really wealthy and influential Jewish family, and they had the grandfather was the head of the Jewish, Baghdadi Jewish community. And they were money changers and treasurers, and at one point like finance ministers. Another whole interesting history around this is the history of the Mamluk, who were slaves that rebelled and actually then ruled Baghdad from a time, and this is all part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire history. But one of the regimes was Daud Pasha, and this is where Albert's father David was in Baghdad, and he was imprisoned, and there was Mamluk ruler was the slave warriors of medieval Islam, and they overthrew their masters and defeated the Mongols and the Crusaders and established another dynasty of that lasted about 300 years. But they ended up persecuting other faiths, and being of Jewish faith, David was imprisoned. And when he was released, their grandfather was really scared that David Sassoon would be in danger. So they fled off to Bushra in Iran, taking Albert and the other brothers with them at the time. And from there, they went to Bombay because that's where business was happening. So essentially, this family is entrepreneurial and they were business people. So this is a picture that was taken of them in their traditional attire. David, the grandfather, always wore this. This Elias was actually going to be Sassoon, David Sassoon, who didn't appear in Vanity Fair, one of the brothers. This was just taken just before he was heading off to England to study. So let's take Albert Sassoon. So remember, he's the son, he was the first one of the Sassoons to appear in Vanity Fair in August 1879. So a little bit of their history was written with the actual sketch. You can see he's adopted the Western dress, and a lot of the thing was around them being Jewish family from Mesopotamia, and that they moved to Bombay and known as the Rothschild of India. We'll go on to how they created their wealth. One of the things they did actually do highlight that, you know, he was a giver to charity and he was quite respected. And it was actually a nice write-up. Words used to describe him, that he was generous, popular, keen, sagacious. And it's a lovely write-up of, by this point you can see he's become a sir, of someone who wasn't British originally. Because when you read through the rest of Vanity Fair, like where he appears, it's very colonial in its language of, you know, the tea parties that are happening and then the way they talk about the natives in inverted commas. So to have this kind of write-up just shows where he'd kind of reached and integrated into British society. He was in society. So if we look in terms of recognition of his time, he was given the Companion Order of the Star of India. He was a member of the Bombay Legislative Council, a Knight Commander. He was given the Freedom of the City of London in November 1873, and this was after he'd moved here and established his business here. And he then was the first Baronet of Kensington Hall. So what did he actually do? So David Sassoon, his father, when they went to Bombay, were involved in trade. And following on, actually, as the right order, following on from Kusumji's presentation, it was the end of the first Opium Wars, and the borders and the trade borders were opened up for people to open trade between China and the rest of the world. And what this meant was that David Sassoon sent his sons Albert and the rest of the brothers one by one. They got involved in the family business and they traded in opium and then selling silk and selling cotton to the UK, bringing UK clothing back to the India, and then actually exporting tea and fabric from China, which was what was in demand. And it was really the cotton industry that helped him transform, Bombay as well into a modern city. He built the Sassoon docks. I will show you some of the constructed buildings that he either solely financed or contributed to. He also set up the mills, which was very economically fruitful. And he changed his name to Albert from Abdullah when he moved to England. He established a company called Spinning and Weaving Company and built the Sassoon docks, which were the first wet docks in Western India. And so I think his representation in Vanity Fair was of, a person who's done well and established himself. Now, Reuben Sassoon also had the same upbringing, and and he came to London to study. His caricatures kind of showing him in a bit more of a, his write-up was that, he was the third son of David Sassoon. It talks about him being lucky Indian merchants. I think they were quite strategic and quite clever in what they were doing. I don't think it was luck. I think, they were quite astute and knew finance and business, and they all studied economics. And as it says, having made his fortune in business, he now spends his money royally, has a few horses, profitable, friend of the Prince of Wales. So he was actually in society and socializing with royalty, etc. And that he has no enemies and he's popular in society. It's full of charity. So this theme is a running theme with the Sassoons in general, charity, and yet quite unostentatious, and that he entertained the Shah. I find some of the write-ups against the caricature, they just have one sentence at the end. It's just like, oh, and that was, it just needed to be put in, which is quite entertaining. Just like, okay, he was entertained, he entertained the Shah. So he grew up in Bombay and he went to Hong Kong and Shanghai, settled in Hove. This is him dressing up for a fancy dress party. He ended up settling in Hove. He was given membership of the Royal Victorian Order, and that was a dynastic order of the knighthood created by Queen Victoria, of whom he was also friends with. What others have written about him that's not represented in the Vanity Fair, that he was actually very mathematically gifted, he was quick-witted, wise, industrious, and commercially savvy, and he was well-mannered. And he was sent first by his father to conduct business in Hong Kong and then Shanghai, and then he was called back to Bombay. And then because David Sassoon, his father, died, he went with his older brother, older brother Sassoon, who was in the picture in the suit, the one where everybody else was dressed in traditional attire. And so Reuben went and took his mother there, the widowed mother, in 1867. And his transition into society was really smooth. He did enjoy playing bridge and art. He loved art and he enjoyed theatre. And he was also very generous with his money. They were part of a set called the Marlborough House set. And there was an incident where he was at a party where one of the members was accused of cheating at bridge. And so his only loose connection to the scandal is really that he was asked to be a witness as to what went on that evening. But in terms of living and being scandal-free, all of the Sassoons in that time have definitely, kept themselves quite on the right side of scandal. So even though they had come like via Baghdad to India, did business in China, and when they were in China as well, they actually bought a lot of land, and the land at that point was very cheap. And so you can see how, you have to have an eye for these things and a bit of luck, but I think it's more judgment. And so a lot of their wealth was realized through that process of land ownership as well as the business. When he did come back to settle in Hove in Brighton, he was part of everywhere they've been, and they were part of the Jewish community, the Anglo-Jewish community, and also did a lot of charitable works for both the Jewish people and also the people that were around in whichever country. So in India, it was regardless of your caste, regardless of religion. I'll show you the pictures of the schools, and they promoted education and healthcare. So we'll move on to Edward Sassoon, and hopefully not running out of time. him again had a very short write-up as being the eldest son, surviving son of what they called the first baronet, which was Abdullah Sassoon. And he was a major in the Duke of the Hussars, and just gives a little bit about, you know, he represented Hythe as a good conservative, and he has houses in Park Lane at Brighton, Sandgate, Pune and Bombay. And it says Mr. Sedge supported him at Hythe with a good speech. We'll come on to that. And the last sentence in this little write-up is, he is rich, as if that's what defines him. He was recorded as a statesman as opposed to a man of the day, because he was a politician. So his history, he went to the University of London, he was a major in the British Army, and he was elected in 1899 to the House of Commons as the Liberal Unionist MP for Hythe. And he married Aline Caroline de Rothschild of the Rothschilds, who, as before, the Sassoons were known as the Rothschilds of the East, and now they married into the Rothschilds of the West. So a very economic move. Not that that would have been the reason. This is a picture actually of Aline Rothschild. It was painted by John Singer Sargent. It's a famous portrait of her, along with Edward. So just looking at the journey of the Sassoons, you know, they started off in Iraq, and this was for both David and the older Abdullah Sassoon, his son, moved to Iran, escaping persecution, essentially, and then decided to settle in Mumbai and did their business between Mumbai and also had property in Pune. And this is the picture of Saint-Sucre, which was their house at the time that they built. And then they traveled to do business in Hong Kong, Canton and Shanghai. They also, I mean, these were places where they based themselves for years, working and doing business. When they came to England, either first originally as visiting stroke working and then settling, they settled in Brighton. And there's a blue plaque in the city of Brighton and Hove against the property at which the Sassoon, one of the other Sassoon brothers lived, where King Edward would visit. So they've actually got a blue plaque to mark that. They haven't got a blue plaque for a member of the Sassoons, but they've got one for King Edward visiting them. This was a property where they stayed in London, where they hired rooms when they first moved. And this is the mausoleum that was built in Brighton. It was repurposed, but the mausoleum itself, the building itself works. The bodies were moved to the Jewish cemetery in Willesden. But wherever they went in the world, and they did also travel, I mean, these were places, London, Brighton, Baghdad, around Iraq, but they visited Russia, yeah, so, you know, they were traveled, they were quite worldly, but it seems that wherever they did go, they contributed to those around them. So, a slightly bit out of order, but this was taken from the First Opium War, but this was where, you know, the tea, silk, porcelain was coming from China to Great Britain. India were taking the opium to Canton, and this is where David Sassoon, the grandfather of the grandfather and the great grandfather of the three that appeared in Vanity Fair, made his huge profits from. And so they were based in Bombay all through the 1830s onwards, you know, and exploited, in terms of the cotton trade, exploited the problems that were happening between, like in America at the time, between 1861 and 1865, the Civil War, and the imports of cotton was declining from America. And so that was the opportunity then to do the export from cotton made in India, to take that to, because it was a large scale production, and take it off to supply the Lancashire factories in England. And then as soon as that trade started, they almost gave up on importing cotton from America. So, that was both fortunate and lucky in business that they did that. And then he started an oil mill in Bombay, and that was one of the first, and that obviously generated more profits. They opened textile branches in China and in India. And as for this is literally where a lot of the income was generated, and that's what paid for building of the Sassoon docks in Bombay. And this is how they earn their money. So some of the prominent buildings contributed to or built by the Sassoons, the Sassoon Library, synagogues, the hospital. I'm not reading them all out. You can see them on the screen. The Elphinstone Technical College, the Gateway of India, they were contributed to, not solely built by. And there are still many buildings that are in their honor. Some have changed names to local Maharashtrian statesmen. But these are some of the buildings you can see here, which is where this is the State Bank of India, the gardens, which are still there with the Albert Museum, and these are the Sassoon docks here. And this is the synagogue and the hospital. So what I wanted to take away from this was that, as a group, the Sassoons, they were really generous. They were hardworking, entrepreneurial, respected, very inclusive. The sense of humor has been written about one or three of the brothers, and sociable. I think you'd have to have some of these qualities to be successful in business and have, generate no enemies at the time. It's quite impressive, and then not being local to where you are. So even when they were Baghdadi Jews and then coming to India, there were Jews in India as well prior to the arrivals of the Sassoons. And there was a hierarchy amongst those as well. But David Sassoon, the grandfather, actually embraced and encouraged, the building of the synagogues for everyone. So it wasn't, they weren't doing that exclusivity thing of, it's just for our type of Jew and not you. There were differences because the Calabar Jews that had been from South India, who'd been there a long time, your practices, even though you're Jewish, can sort of diverge a bit from others. But the community was strong. They, the schools that were set up by the Sassoons were open to all. And so really lived well from what has been written and what is available. I'm sure if there were scandals that we would know about them. I think they lived well, and they actually lived, contributed a lot back to society under the constraints of what everybody was going through. But that is actually the end of my presentation on the Sassoons. Lalit.
Oh, what a presentation, Bina. That was so very detailed, illustrated, engaging presentation. You came out with so many interesting anecdotes. It gave an insight also to how Britain or the empire treated men of power and wealth when they came to this country, and what these people who came from India, they achieved here, what they did for themselves, for society. In fact, your talk was very, very engaging, and I really really loved it. And I want everybody to give you a big hand. And,
Thank you. Not required as.
Yeah, if you can, yeah, you've taken that off. And so, do I praise Lyn, Kusum also, because all three of you, with a little bit of my contribution, I think we in fact felt that we have gone back into the time. It was like journeying the past and living the past. So that brings us to the end of our show today, but I would very much open it for any questions and any concluding remarks or word of thanks if John would like to do at the end of it. But before that, yeah, John, I'm coming to you. Before we go and before we give it to John for vote of thanks, I would appreciate if Vikalp, if he's around, although he's from Nainital in India, he would like to play the small video for tomorrow that he has done, which is hardly less than a minute. So I go straight to John. I think he's got something to ask.
Actually, no. It's. I've got three comments. The first one is fairly obvious. I think what we've seen today in terms of the cartoons show that the more you are part of the high society, the more the representation becomes like a photograph without distortion. So, clearly Mansur Ali Khan was seen, as Lyn showed, his was the most kind of just, offensive, I think, really, because he clearly crossed too many boundaries for Vanity Fair, whereas with the Sassoons, they're very much inserted within high society. That's the first thing, I think, in terms of looking at the styles. And also, I think that links also to how cartoons are linked to photographs. Is something that I'll talk about when I talk about Ranjit Singhji. The second thing is that actually the Sassoons, as Bina was saying, are part of the high society Anglo-Jewish elite. And they were extremely worried by the arrival of Polish and Russian Jews at this time who didn't fit in. And this also was part of the kind of anti-Semitism that was always, we always had anti-Semitic feeling in Britain and across Europe. And the Anglo-Jewish elite, like the Sassoons, were very worried, and Montefiore's as well. Rothschilds were all very worried about assimilating these East European Jews as fast as possible. And one of the Montefiore's taught them cricket. He thought this was the way to kind of Anglicize them. So that's the second point. And the third point that's very interesting, the way that Hove is a continual theme, because, Brighton was the kind of the Prince Regent's place of pleasure where he had his mistresses and hanging out by the beach and all that kind of stuff, a bit like today, actually. But Hove developed as a very Victorian extension to Brighton. And again, Ranjit Singhji, it's where the Sussex Cricket Club is based also. And people like Ranjit Singhji, Imran Khan, of course, played for Sussex. So you get these fascinating linkages. That's really 3 points I wanted to. They're more comments, they're not questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John, for those insights and comments. Anybody else? Any other people?
Lalit, can I say something?
Yes, Sohas, most welcome.
I'm
Nice
sorry
to
I was
see
a
you.
bit late for the first presentation, but I had some family issues. And first of all, thank you for organizing the program. But particularly my comments in the first instance are for Kusum's presentation. It really clearly shows the British attitude to, like East India Company, is to trade and destroy the economies in the country. And it's only not that. That is a sort of a capitalist attitude of ensuring. But the cartoons show that how much racist they were. the incidences show. So, and the racism, it is, we are talking then of the 19th century, we still have the same in a completely different form. So it is something which we got to note that has been in existence, and that has been the general attitude. I'm not saying that every British person, every English person is like that. I'm talking generally of the people in power and people who are running the show. So that is something that needs to be noted. As regards the Sassoons, I come from Mumbai. And so I'm aware of a lot of contribution the Sassoons have made. And they were like some of the Parsi people who came to India. And these Zionists, they actually made a lot of contribution in terms of industries, in terms of hospitals, in terms of helping people. So that needs to be appreciated. Thank you, Lalit.
Thank you very much, Sohas, for your comments. So I would welcome anyone else. Kusum, you want to make a point? Please go ahead. Can't hear you. Can you raise your voice?
Yeah, what I found interesting about Bina's presentation was that apart from telling us about what the Sassoons did and who they were and all that, she also tried to sort of give a summary of what contributes to success. And that's like having, looking at people and trying to draw out certain qualities that can help people even today on how to succeed in life, what qualities they should develop in oneself, and virtues that should be pursued for success and for making a point and to make some difference. That was very good thought.
Yeah, that's really a very good point. So I can take one more observation, comment, or question, and then we can wrap it up for today. Right. Okay. So that is
that I had.
Yeah, Alka, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I'm just curious to understand, like there is like a disparity between the portraits. People with power were portrayed slightly differently and than who were not. Does that still happen in today's world? Like, does the media portray some as positive and some as negative, or this is just something that happened in 18th century or 19th century, and
it happens today. It happens today. Even if you look at the way politicians, doesn't matter what your political persuasion, but they use the worst photo or the kindest photo, depending on what they're trying to portray. Do you know, it's, they will, I mean, cartoon, I haven't got, I'm not an expert on cartoons or anything, but just from papers and looking at papers and things, you can tell the way that somebody's portrayed, depending on what the story is. And there are racist portrayals of people, you know, there are tropes, there are ones that they'll show you, you know, in terms of context, what they're showing. But yeah, it does happen today. There'll be slight things, you know, why some people, they, you know, not smiling or not, you know, yeah, I think that it still absolutely happens today. I mean, caricatures are caricatures, but the ones that we've seen today, you can see the difference in, like, yeah, I would say, I don't know what other people with more knowledge would think, but mine just from a layperson's observations would say yes, definitely.
So the only difference between that time and now is that then people were not aware and now people are slightly aware. Maybe that's the only difference. Does everyone?
What, in terms of like the racist portrayals?
Yeah.
Or just in general?
Just in general, like the portrayal, like, does everybody feel like now people are more aware when there is a positive and a negative portrayal than they were in the 19th century?
Yes, I'd say there definitely is. I think there is more awareness amongst people today. I think that it is definitely still done today. From what I've seen over the past couple of years, it doesn't matter what leaning any particular individual party has politically. You do see these things happen in media. I think in pretty much everywhere. That's what I feel. Yes, good observation and good question.
Thank you.
Right. And anybody else wants to make a comment or add something to it, or then we will wind up. Right. Okay. So that is all for today, and I must thank everyone, especially Lyn and Bina and Kusum for their presentations. And I would also like to thank John and even our investment manager from Heritage Lottery Fund, who was there for quite a long time. I think he wanted to know how we are doing. So that was very, very heartening.
I think we missed the video.
Sorry?
Yeah, the video you said you were going to play. Where is it?
Yeah, we are going to. No, I just wanted to say a few lines and then I'm going to do that. Okay. Don't worry. I just want to say that we have got a very good lineup, which you will see in the video. Tomorrow, I would like to mention two young SACF volunteers. Is Mahak Vedi, who will be speaking on Sultan of Johor, and of course Uttara will be talking about the Emperor of Korea, and then we have got a lineup in the next 4 days, 3 days, which we will talk tomorrow. And if Vikalp is hearing me, Vikalp, can you play the video promo that you have done for us? Thank you very much, Vikalp, for your working with us continuously. I would give the final lines to John, and then we will close. And see you all tomorrow. And I must also thank Kulraj Fuller, who is SACF's old favorite. And Kulraj, thank you very much for coming. And so, of course, Sushma Sabnis, we will look forward to her presentation and who's been here for all the time. Yes, John, for you.
Well, it's just very simply to say what a fascinating time we've had, despite all the vagaries of the internet and Zoom and heaven knows what. So congratulations to Kusum and Uttara for enabling us to have such a wonderful time. I'm looking forward to the next 4 days. Wow, what a journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm stopping the recording.